chapter 15. And if you remember, Greta has Hercufleas inside her fist and they're going through the forest on the back of artifacts. Chapter 15. On they rode through the forest. It was just like an adventure in an Avalonian fairy tale. A brave hero, a noble steed, a fair maiden. Except the brave hero was the size of a raisin, the fair maiden was a scowling kidnapper, and the noble steed was some sort of gigantic albino chicken. It was not an adventure Hercufleas wanted to be a part of. He had fought in Greta's grip, biting and struggling and yelling until he was exhausted. Eventually, his rage cooled to a dull anger, and his anger froze into icy terror. There was nothing he could do. Greta was taking him off to fight a giant that had crushed Avalon's strongest hero into little pieces. What terrified Hercufleas even more than Yuck was what might be happening to his Fleemily right now. They had no idea that their host was a greedy, attempted murderer who hired out villains as well as heroes. He imagined Stickler taking his hat from his head and shaking it up and down the porch, yelling, "I told you to keep your little hatchling under control. I gave you a formal warning." He imagined Min and Pin and the others huddling together in the mist, shivering, hungry, homeless. He imagined Stickler deciding the Fleemily needed to be silenced to protect his reputation. He had to make Greta let him go, whatever it took. He started off with lies. Greta, I think I've sprained my ankle. Greta, I've just remembered, I left my sword back in Avalon. Greta, I'm allergic to giants. They give me a rash. When lies didn't work, he tried threats. Greta, you have until the count of 3 to let me out. Otherwise, I'll bite you, suck out all your blood, and leave you here like a shriveled up prune. 1, 2, 2.5, 2, and almost very nearly 3. He tried curses. I hope Yuck eats you right after he eats me. He tried begging. Please, 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 let me go. Nothing worked. After hours of stumbling between trees, Hercufleas felt Greta's fingers starting to loosen their grip, and finally she let him go completely. I'm sorry, she said curtly. I shouldn't have snatched you like that. Come on, you can hop on my shoulder if you want. Hercufleas ignored her. He stood in her palm, stretching his stiff legs. Now it was his turn to scowl. What makes you think I'm coming with you? He said. I'm hopping back to Avalon to save my Fleemily. Your Fleemily will be fine, Greta interrupted. For now, we can deal with Stickler later. There's Hercufleas stretching his legs after being squeezed in her palm for so long. What if he gets rid of them like he tried to get rid of you? Why would he? He needs them. They're his employ fleas. But if he thinks that Hercufleas couldn't bring himself to say murdered. If he realises that Prince is in... If he finds out that was me, he won't. Think about it. Ugor didn't even see you. And you didn't tell anyone where you were going, did you? Hercufleas shook his head. Greta had a point. But it still feels wrong to leave them, he said. Greta gave a huff and plonked him on Artifact's head. Then she slid onto the ground, plucked some brambleberries from a bush and fed them to the bird one by one. Also, she added quietly while Artifacts pecked, if you did try and escape, I doubt you'd make it very far. You might be a good giant slayer, but that won't help you in here. Hercufleas looked around. Trees in every direction, the whole place silent and somehow lifeless. He shook his jitters away. What was there to be scared of? It was just a wood. Greta seemed to sense his thoughts. We're not in Avalon anymore. This is Petrosia, and Petrosia doesn't have woods. It has woodants instead. Artifacts finished his meal, clucking with pleasure, and Greta stroked his neck before whispering, Know how the woodant got its name, Hercufleas? Because you wouldn't want to go through it. Not if you had a choice. Hercufleas sighed. He didn't believe her. She was just trying to make him stay. "What should I be scared of then?" he said. "Is the Bolgan man coming to get us?" Greta shook her head. "No, the Bolgan man lives miles away to the west," she said. "Here it's mainly wolves and black bears and grizzly squirrels." Hercules chuckled. "Grizzly squirrels? Give me a wolf or a black bear over a grizzly squirrel any day," she said. "At least they can't climb trees, although you shouldn't ever climb trees in a wouldn't. They're the most dangerous things of all." Greta's words made Hercufles' insides cold and squirmy, as if he had drunk slug blood. "Trees? What's dangerous about trees?" "Nothing," Greta shrugged, "unless you're in a wouldn't. Here they're big and hungry." Hercules shivered. "Trees? Hungry?" "The wouldn't isn't so thick," Greta said. "The wouldn't is so thick," Greta said. "Sunlight gets blotted out before it reaches the floor. The trees that grow beneath the canopy have to find something other than sunbeams to feed on. Pine needlers feed on birds. Bramble strangle feeds on other trees. Rattlesnokes are the worst. They camouflage themselves to look just like normal oaks, but their roots move, and each rattle root has a snake's head at the end. A bite from one of them will paralyse you in seconds. Then they drag you towards the trunk and the rattlesnake gobbles you up." A branch creaked behind Hercufles. He jumped up, hitting his head on a leaf, which made him scream, which made Greta laugh. "It's autumn now," she said, "so all the rattle roots will be settling down to hibernate. And right now they have seed pods on their branches that shake when anyone gets too close. Over there, listen." Hercules strained his ears. Far to his left, above the rustle of the wouldn't, he heard a harsh rattling, like a dozen maracas shaking, and then far off a wolf's howl. He trembled. Beneath his feet, so did artifacts. "You know a lot about this wouldn't, Greta." "I have to. I'm a woodcutter." She tapped the axe on her back and smiled sadly, just like my parents were. In the distance, the rattlesnake shook again, and Greta's eyes got a faraway look in them. "Once," she told him, "before the guzzlings, Papa crept up to a rattlesnake and carved Mama's name into its trunk." Here's her beautiful axe. You see there? And down the base it's got a sort of little face on it. "Papa crept up on a rattlesnake and carved Mama's name into its trunk. Then he chopped off one of its roots to prove he'd done it, and made her this axe." She showed Hercules the gnarled handle of her axe, which ended in the varnished head of a snake. It looked as if it was carved into the wood, but Hercules knew now that it wasn't. A tree with serpent roots. "Mama always used to tell me that story." Greta fell quiet. "Are you hungry?" Hercules realised suddenly that yes, he was hungry and scared. "Lion blood if you have any," he said. Then seeing her glare, he added, "Well, cougar or panther blood would do." Greta held out her thumb. "Drink," she said. Hercules winced at the memory of Greta's bitter tasting blood. He'd prefer to drink blood from artifacts, but that might be rude. So he nipped her and took a quick sip. Just like last time, it puckered his mouth and made him shudder as it slid down his throat. But then the aftertaste carried a hint of something sweet that hadn't been there before. It was hope. Greta believed in Hercules. She truly thought he was the one to save her town. Now there was no longer only bitterness inside her. The wood grew lighter, and suddenly they found themselves in a clearing where all the trees were overturned or jagged stumps. In the starlight, the valley was a colour both black and emerald. The moon was white silver. Did Yuck do this?" Hercules looked across the jumble of broken trees and churned earth. Greta shrugged. Maybe. Don't worry though, he won't wake until the new moon. And we're almost through now. Tumba's just beyond this valley." She looked up, frowning. Did you hear that? Hercufleas strained his ears, catching the snap of twigs, the dry rustle of dead leaves. The wind? He said hopefully. Greta shook her head. There is no wind, she said, turning around and edging artefacts into the clearing. Something's in the trees. Is it wolves? He whimpered, cowering up her sleeve. A black bear or a grizzly squirrel? Quiet, she hissed, pulling on the reins. Artifacts reared up. Suddenly Greta's axe was in her hands. Who's there? She called. Oh, that's the end of chapter 15. I wonder who is there in the woods.